There is a particular kind of darkness that belongs to a rural New England road in the dead of winter. It's a profound, enveloping blackness, cushioned by snow that dampens all sound, broken only by the skeletal silhouettes of trees against a star-dusted sky. The road itself is a ribbon of asphalt, often slick with ice, winding through a landscape that feels ancient and indifferent. To be on one of these roads at night is to feel a sense of isolation that is both beautiful and deeply unsettling. Your car becomes a small, warm bubble of light and sound, a fragile sanctuary moving through a vast and silent world. But when that sanctuary is breached, when the crunch of metal replaces the hum of the engine, when the world outside the windshield tilts at a sickening angle and comes to a sudden, violent stop that isolation transforms, it becomes a palpable threat. The silence that follows is no longer peaceful. It is heavy, absolute, and filled with unknown possibilities. The darkness is no longer just a backdrop. It becomes an active participant in the story that is about to unfold. On the evening of February 9, 2004, on a sharp hairpin turn on a road called Wild Ammonoosuc Road, or Route 112, in the small town of Haverhill, New Hampshire, just such a breach occurred. A 1996 black Saturn sedan spun out and crashed into a snowbank. The driver, a 21-year-old nursing student named Maura Murray, was, by all accounts, uninjured. But within minutes, before the first police officer could arrive on the scene, she would vanish. She didn't just walk away. She stepped out of her car and into a mystery so dense, so layered with contradiction and strange clues, that it has become one of the most obsessive and fiercely debated unsolved disappearances of the 21st century. This is not just a missing person case. It is a labyrinth. It is a story about a young woman who was, for reasons we may never fully understand, running from her life, only to run headlong into a fate that remains a complete and agonizing void. Her disappearance launched a massive search, a sprawling police investigation, and, most notably, a grassroots online movement of citizen detectives who have dedicated years, even decades, to dissecting every detail of her life and her last known moments. It has become the archetypal mystery of the digital age, a case that feels less like a police file and more like a collaborative, and often contentious, true crime documentary being written in real time. Tonight, we will attempt a deep and thorough case analysis. We will sift through the evidence, the timelines, the theories, and the endless questions that surround her name. Who was Maura Murray? Was she a victim of a random, opportunistic predator who happened upon her disabled car on a dark road? Or was she a troubled young woman who orchestrated her own disappearance, a desperate act to escape a life that had become unbearable? The answers, if they exist at all, lie somewhere in the frozen darkness of that New Hampshire night, and in the strange, perplexing days that led up to it. This is the story of the girl who was here one second and gone the next. To understand why Maura Murray was on a remote road in the White Mountains of New Hampshire on a Monday night in February, we must first understand the woman she was, and the turbulent week that preceded her disappearance. Maura was, by all accounts, a remarkable young woman. She was the fourth of 5 children in a close-knit Irish Catholic family from Hanson, Massachusetts. She was a star athlete in high school and all-star runner. She was intelligent, driven, and ambitious. She initially attended the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point, a testament to her discipline and capability. But after a minor infraction involving stolen Makupa small act of rebellion that seemed strangely out of character, she chose to leave West Point and transfer to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she enrolled in their highly competitive nursing program. On the surface, she was thriving. She had a serious boyfriend, Billy Roche, a fellow West Point cadet. She was doing well in her studies. She was well-liked, charismatic, and had a bright future ahead of her. But beneath this polished surface, a series of cracks had begun to appear. The story of her disappearance is not just about the events of February 9th. It's about the subtle and not-so-subtle signs of distress that were accumulating in the months, weeks, and especially the days leading up to it. In November of 2003, just 3 months before she vanished, Maura was arrested for using a stolen credit card to order food. The charges were minor and were set to be dismissed if she stayed out of trouble for 3 months. Again, It was an act of petty crime that seemed incongruous with the responsible, high-achieving young woman her family and friends knew. Was it a simple mistake, or a sign of some underlying turmoil? The week before she disappeared was particularly fraught. On the evening of Thursday, February 5th, Maura was on the phone with her older sister, Kathleen. They were having a normal, sisterly conversation when Maura suddenly became emotional. Kathleen later described her as being in a complete zone, shut down. And then she just started crying. Kathleen, concerned, tried to ask her what was wrong, but Maura was unresponsive, her sobs turning into a kind of catatonic silence. The call ended without any resolution. To this day, no one knows what triggered this emotional breakdown. 2 nights later, on Saturday, February 7th, Maura's father, Fred Murray, came to visit her at UMass Amherst. He had just bought her a new car, the 1996 Black Saturn, and he was in town to help her shop for a used car for himself. They spent the day together, went to dinner with one of Maura's friends, and then, later that night, things took another strange turn. Fred and Maura went to a party at her dorm. At around 2:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, as they were leaving, Maura borrowed her father's new Toyota Corolla to drive him back to his motel. On the way, at a T-intersection, she inexplicably crashed the car, causing nearly $10,000 in damage. Police responded to the scene, but no sobriety test was administered, and no charges were filed. It was treated as a simple accident. Fred would later say that she was shaken but uninjured. He got a rental car, dropped Maura back at her dorm, and told her to call her insurance company on Monday. He then drove home to Massachusetts. This was the last time he would ever see his daughter. The timeline on Monday, February 9th, the day she disappeared, is a meticulously reconstructed puzzle of digital breadcrumbs and cryptic actions. It begins in the early hours of the morning. At 12:55 a.m., Maura used her personal computer to search MapQuest for directions to the Berkshires, a mountainous region in western Massachusetts, and to Burlington, Vermont. Why she was looking at these destinations remains a mystery. At 1:24 p.m. that afternoon, she sent an email to her boyfriend, Billy Roche. The email had a loving, almost nostalgic tone. It read, in part, "I love you more, stud. I got your messages, but honestly, I didn't feel like talking to much of anyone. I promised to call today, though." It was the last email she would ever send him. At 2:05 p.m., she called the number for condominium rentals in Bartlett, New Hampshire, a resort town popular for skiing and hiking. She was on the phone for about 5 minutes. Did she rent a condo for the week? The owner of the rental company has stated that no rental was ever made. At 2:18 p.m., she called her boyfriend, Billy, and left him a voicemail message, promising to talk to him later. This would be the last time he would ever hear her voice. Sometime that afternoon, she also sent an email to her professors and her supervisor at her clinical nursing job. The email was a lie. She wrote that there had been a death in her family and that she would be gone for a week. Her family has confirmed, emphatically, that there was no death. This was a premeditated fabrication, a clear indication that she was planning to be away, and that she did not want anyone to know her real reasons. After sending the emails, she packed a bag. She packed textbooks for her classes, birth control pills, and some clothes. She also went to an ATM and withdrew $280, which was nearly all the money in her bank account. She then went to a liquor store and purchased about $40 worth of alcohol, including Bailey's Irish Cream, Kahlua, and a box of Franzia red wine. Then, she got into her black Saturn sedan, the car her father had bought for her just days earlier, and she started driving north. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Her destination and her purpose were a secret she took with her. The last confirmed sighting of her before the crash was at 3:40 p.m. An ATM security camera captured her image as she withdrew the cash. She was alone. She was wearing a dark coat and had her hair up. She did not appear to be under any duress. She just looked like a college student running errands. She then drove north, for hours, into the fading light of a winter afternoon. Her journey took her from the busy highways of Massachusetts into the quiet, winding roads of the White Mountains of New Hampshire. We don't know why she chose this direction. Was she heading for the condos in Bartlett that she had called about? Was she going to Burlington, Vermont, one of the destinations from her MapQuest search? Or was she just driving, with no destination in mind, trying to outrun the pressures and problems of her life? At approximately 7:27 p.m., the bubble of her journey burst. A resident of Haverhill, New Hampshire, a woman named Faith Westman, was at home when she heard a loud thump outside. She looked out her window and saw a car, Maura's black Saturn, spun around and stuck in a snowbank on the opposite side of the road. It had apparently failed to navigate a sharp, unlit hairpin turn known locally as the Weathered Barn Corner. Faith called 911 to report a single-car accident. She noted that she could see a person moving around the vehicle, but she couldn't tell if they were male or female. She also noted that the car's headlights were on, but she did not see any signs of an emergency, such as hazard lights or flares. While she was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, she saw another vehicle pull up alongside the Saturn. This was a school bus, driven by a local man named Butch Atwood. Atwood, a part-time bus driver and contractor, was on his way home. He saw the crashed car and the young woman, and he pulled over to help. Butch Atwood would be the last known person to speak with Maura Murray. His testimony is the cornerstone of the entire mystery. He said he pulled up and asked the young woman if she was okay, if she needed him to call the police. Maura, he said, was visibly cold and shivering, but she seemed uninjured and lucid. She was not, he noted, visibly bleeding or intoxicated. He said she told him she was fine and pleaded with him not to call the police. She claimed she had already called AAA for a tow truck. This was another lie. Records show no call was ever made to AAA. Atwood, seeing that she didn't want his help and knowing that cell service was notoriously poor in that area, felt it was his duty to call for help anyway. He told her he would call from his house, which was just a short distance up the road. He got back in his bus and drove home, leaving Maura alone with her disabled car on the dark road. Atwood's house was only about 100 yards from the crash scene. He immediately called 911. The call was logged at 7:43 p.m. It had been approximately 16 minutes since Faith Westman's initial 911 call. At 7:46 p.m., just 3 minutes after Atwood's call, the first police officer arrived on the scene. Sergeant Cecil Smith of the Haverhill Police Department pulled up to the Weathered Barn Corner. He found the black Saturn, locked, stuck in the snowbank. The windshield was cracked on the driver's side, and both airbags had deployed. A red liquid, which was later determined to be wine from the box of Franzia, was spilled inside and outside the car. On the back seat were her packed bags, her textbooks, her birth control pills. On the front seat was a MapQuest printout with the directions to Burlington, Vermont. The car's tailpipe had a rag stuffed into it, but Maura Murray was gone. Sergeant Smith searched the immediate area. He saw no footprints in the snow leading away from the car, except for those between the driver's side door and the snowbank. The snow was deep, but the ground around the road was firm and crusted. It was as if she had stepped out of her car and simply vanished from the face of the earth. The window of time for her disappearance was incredibly small. Butch Atwood had left her at the scene. He drove 100 yards home and made a call. Sergeant Smith arrived minutes later. In that brief, 7 to 10 minute window, Maura Murray had disappeared into the cold New Hampshire night. This is the central, immovable fact of the case. A young woman, a disabled car, a dark road, and a 10-minute window. Everything else is a storm of speculation, a web of theories that range from the chillingly plausible to the wildly conspiratorial. Let's begin a thorough case analysis of the main possibilities. Theory 1. She succumbed to the elements. This is the simplest and often the most likely explanation in cases like this. In this scenario, Maura, disoriented from the accident and perhaps intoxicated, feared getting a DUI. This would have been her third alcohol-related incident in a matter of months, and it could have had serious consequences for her nursing license and her future. Panicked by the arrival of Butch Atwood and the imminent arrival of the police, she decided to flee the scene on foot. She intended to just hide in the woods until the police left. But in the darkness, cold, and her disoriented state, she became lost. She wandered deeper into the vast wilderness of the White Mountains, eventually succumbing to hypothermia. The winters in New Hampshire are brutal. The temperature that night was well below freezing. An unprepared person would not last long. This theory is logical. It explains her desire to avoid the police and her sudden disappearance. Massive searches were conducted in the days and weeks that followed, covering miles of dense forest and rugged terrain. Searchers on foot with dogs and in helicopters scoured the area. They found nothing. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a single sign. While it's possible for a body to remain hidden in such a vast wilderness, the complete lack of any trace of her, especially near the road, is deeply puzzling. The tracking dogs, brought in the day after, were reportedly unable to establish a clear track leading away from the scene. This suggests she may not have entered the woods at all. Theory 2. She was a victim of foul play, a crime of opportunity. This theory posits that Maura was not alone on that road for those crucial 10 minutes. Someone else came along. A predator, perhaps, driving that dark road, who saw a young woman alone with a disabled car and saw an opportunity. In this scenario, a stranger pulled over, offered her a ride, and she, wanting to get away from the scene before police arrived, accepted. This person then abducted her, and worse. This theory explains the lack of footprints in the snow and the failure of the tracking dogs. She didn't walk into the woods. She got into another car. It's a terrifyingly plausible scenario that happens with horrifying regularity. The A-frame house, located very near the crash scene, has been a focus of intense speculation for years. At the time, it was occupied by a young man who had a troubled history. Police have investigated him, and others living in the area, extensively, but have never named a suspect or found any evidence linking anyone to Maura's disappearance. A crucial piece of information that lends some credence to this theory came from one of the initial witnesses. The driver who lived just past the crash scene, in the direction Maura was heading, reported seeing a car with red and blue flashing lights, possibly a private vehicle with a police scanner, parked at the scene shortly after the crash. Was this the police? Or was it someone impersonating law enforcement, a tactic sometimes used by predators? Another witness, a woman who drove by the scene just before police arrived, reported seeing a police SUV, number 001, parked nose-to-nose with Maura's Saturn. The Haverhill Police Department did have an SUV with that number, but the officer who drove it, Sergeant Cecil Smith, was the first official officer to arrive, and he has always stated he was alone and did not park nose-to-nose. These witness accounts are conflicting and have been fiercely debated, but they open the door to the possibility that another vehicle and another person was at that scene before the official timeline begins. Theory 3. The tandem driver and a planned disappearance. This is perhaps the most complex and debated theory of all. It suggests that Maura was not alone. She was traveling in tandem with another, unknown driver. The car accident was real, an unplanned complication, but the disappearance was not. In this scenario, Maura had a plan to escape her life, at least for a while. She had lied to her professors, packed a bag, and taken out cash. She was heading for a new, temporary life, possibly in Canada, which is not far from where she crashed. The person in the second car was her ride, her accomplice. When she crashed, the plan changed. The tandem driver, who was either ahead of her or behind her, would have circled back. In the few minutes after Butch Atwood left and before Sergeant Smith arrived, this person picked her up. They then continued on with their original plan, disappearing into the night. This theory explains everything. The premeditated lies, the packed bags, the lack of evidence at the scene, and her refusal of help from Butch Atwood, because she knew her real help was on the way. It turns Maura from a victim into the master of her own fate. This theory has many proponents, and it is fueled by the many strange aspects of her life in the days leading up to her disappearance. The death in the family email is the strongest piece of evidence for a planned departure. But who would the tandem driver be? Her family and friends have all been accounted for and have adamantly denied any involvement in or knowledge of such a plan. Could it have been someone she met online? A secret friend no one knew about? A strange detail that supports this theory is the rag in the tailpipe. Police found a piece of cloth, possibly a glove, stuffed into the Saturn's exhaust pipe. Why was it there? Fred Murray, Maura's father, has long suggested that this was an old trick to prevent a car from starting, and that Maura may have done this if she was having car trouble and was trying to avoid smoke. Others believe it's a sign that she intended to abandon the car, or perhaps even that it was a signal to a tandem driver. Still others believe it was put there by police or first responders and is a red herring. Its true significance remains one of the case's most stubborn mysteries. The online world has become the fourth and perhaps most dominant character in this story. In the years since she vanished, an army of podcasters, bloggers, YouTubers, and forum posters have taken up her case. They have created a sprawling, collaborative, and often toxic ecosystem of investigation. They have uncovered new leads, interviewed witnesses the police missed, and kept her story in the public eye. The podcast Missing Maura Murray and the book True Crime Addict by author James Renner have brought the case to a massive global audience. But this intense public scrutiny has also had a dark side. It has led to the harassment of local residents, the spreading of unfounded rumors, and bitter infighting between different factions of online sleuths, each convinced they hold the key to the mystery. The residents of Haverhill, New Hampshire, particularly those who lived near the crash site, have had their lives turned upside down, accused of conspiracy and murder by anonymous people on the internet. The line between helpful investigation and harmful obsession has been blurred, and sometimes erased entirely. Maura's family, particularly her father Fred, has been on a relentless, heartbreaking quest for answers for nearly 2 decades. Fred Murray has been a fierce critic of the police investigation, believing they mishandled the crucial early hours and have not been transparent. He has conducted his own searches, hired his own private investigators, and fought tirelessly to keep his daughter's case from going cold. His love for his daughter is a powerful driving force, but his single-minded pursuit has also, at times, put him at odds with law enforcement and even with some of the online community. So, where does that leave us? We are left with a ghost, a 21-year-old woman who was at a crossroads in her life. She was bright and beloved, but she was also making poor decisions and was clearly under immense emotional distress. She lied to the people closest to her, packed a bag, and drove north towards an unknown destination. She crashed her car on a dark road and, in the space of a few minutes, was gone. Was she a victim of a terrible crime? Did she meet a monster on that lonely road? Or was she the architect of her own vanishing, a desperate young woman who saw no other way out? Did she succeed in starting a new life somewhere? Or did her plan go horribly wrong, leaving her to perish alone in the unforgiving wilderness? The case of Maura Murray is a story about the terrifying power of the unknown. It is a perfect storm of strange circumstances, a deeply troubled backstory, and a frustrating lack of physical evidence. It is a story that has no ending, a void that has been filled with endless speculation. Her black Saturn, found empty on the side of the road, is a perfect metaphor for the case itself. We can look inside, we can see all the pieces of her life laid out, but the person at the center of it all is missing. She remains one of the most haunting and resonant of all unsolved disappearances, a testament to the fact that sometimes a person can simply drive down a dark road and never be seen again. If you have any information, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, about the disappearance of Maura Murray, please contact the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit. Her family deserves answers. She deserves to be found. Thank you for joining me in this deep dive into one of the most compelling and frustrating mysteries of our time. In the comments, I would be interested to hear your thoughts. Which theory resonates most with you? What piece of evidence do you find most compelling? The search for Maura Murray continues, not just in the woods of New Hampshire, but in the conversations we have and the questions we refuse to stop asking. Until next time, stay curious and be safe on your journey.